On the special edition of Mets Musings, we're going to take a look back at the life and times of Tom Seaver with a couple of his teammates and author Erik Sherman. So check it out, coming up right now. I'm joined now by the former New York Met pitcher and a teammate of Tom Seaver, Jon Matlack. Jon was the 1972 Rookie of the Year in the National League. And Jon, welcome back to Mets Musings.
Thanks, Gary.
As I said, I'm so sorry to be talking to you under these circumstances. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, but under these circumstances, it's not what I had hoped for.
No, there's no question. It's a sad time.
And can you tell us about the first time that you met Tom Seaver?
Hard to say. I was a rookie, 19-year-old kid, first time in Major League spring training, and all the pitchers are in a group in spring training doing their drills and exercises, and we just sort of bumped into each other and said hi, and that was basically it as the pitchers were going through their morning workouts.
Now, you have an interesting I was reading about your Major League debut, and you pitched 7 strong innings, and maybe you want to tell us what happened after that.
Well, I was sort of a happy camper, I guess you could say, because I had Tom Seaver as a caddy that day. I was behind 2-1 on a home run by Tony Perez, and they pinch hit for me. And I guess the top of the 8th, I think it was. In any event, we scored runs. I leave the game ahead 3-2. They bring in Tom to relieve because it's close to All-Star break and he's not going to get another start. And I'm in the shower in the clubhouse thinking, I got my first big league W when Tony Perez hits another home run and we end up losing.
So a blown save by Tom Seaver, that's something you see too often.
No.
And can you tell us what kind of influence did he have over you, over your career, and over your pitching, that sort of thing?
Tommy was a great influence and a good friend. I'm really sorry that we drifted apart after playing days were over. We did speak from time to time, but not nearly as frequently as I would have liked. And I guess we're both to blame for that. But Tom was giving of his time and knowledge. They put me in a great spot when I made the big leagues in terms of where I was in the locker room. My locker was directly between Tom's on one side and Jerry Kuzman's on the other. And you couldn't ask for better company and people to talk shop with than those two.
And he was, I know Skip Lockwood had told me that Tom helped him a lot. Was there any specific thing that he helped you with during your career?
There were many. He didn't necessarily get involved with the mechanics of pitching. It was more on the mental side of things. He was probably a lot more of a deep thinker even than people might have considered him. I think that one of the most profound things that he said to me that really hit home was that if you don't claim success that you have, whether you feel like it was earned or not, you're doomed to give it back. And the message was that, even though you might have pitched 6 innings and it was suspect and you gave up 4 or 5 runs and you end up coming away with a win, claim that as a success rather than failure or luck, or you're doomed to return it someday. Yeah. I found that to be very true over the span of my career.
Yeah, certainly over anybody's career. That's good advice. What was it like sitting between those two guys, though? It had to be, they were, Tom liked a good prank.
No question.
And Jerry liked the good prank, too, once in a while. Do you have any that you could relate to us?
Well, I don't know if either one of them were responsible, but they were both involved, no doubt, because when I was first there in the big leagues and fan mail and messages would be placed on the stool in front of your locker. And when I arrived at the clubhouse one day, I noticed a pink slip. There was a phone message and a phone number there, and please return a phone call to Mr. Fox. And there was a phone that we could use on the clubhouse wall, and I walked over to the phone and proceeded to dial this number that was on the message and looking for Mr. Fox and try and find out what this was all about. And when the number answered on the other end, it was the Bronx Zoo. And half of the clubhouse was standing behind me giggling.
So they just loved. They were fun-loving guys. That was kind of a fun-loving team in those early '70s. And you were traded in December of '77, but Tom was traded on that dreadful night in June of '77. What was it like for the team at that time when that whole thing happened with Kingman and everybody getting traded that night?
It was disconcerting, puzzling. To this day, I don't necessarily understand all that happened, and I've read a lot about it. I know there were extraneous circumstances at play in terms of how Tom was being treated. Whether or not he actually asked for it, which certain articles said, I honestly don't know. But it was the beginning of the dismantling of what I thought could have been a very fine ball club for a long time. Tommy went in June of '78, like you said. I went, sorry, '77, and I was in December of '77, and then Cousy in June of '78. So within the span of a year, the nucleus of the pitching staff disappeared.
Now, a couple of guys that I spoke to said that two of the things that Tom liked to talk about in later life was wine, and one thing was and the other thing was Gil Hodges. Did he ever talk to you much about Gil Hodges?
Not in any real specifics, other than that he was a man that Tommy revered greatly. Talked about the size of his hands, talked about his quiet strength. Just somebody that he really looked up to.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any other special memories of Tom that when somebody says his name, it immediately comes to your mind?
Well, there's probably two things. One is a little nonsensical. Is that Tommy was a thinker and a bridge player, and always wanted to play bridge. When there was a rain delay or time to kill, or on the plane, or wherever we might find the time. And Koosman and I became partners fairly early on. Maybe it was just the lefties hanging together. I don't know. And we were nowhere near as quality players as Tom. Mm-hmm. But no matter who he got to partner with him, he had a tough time beating us because it seemed like we always got better cards, and it used to drive him crazy. So that's something that always gives me a laugh when I think about Tom. And the other thing was a story that I was having trouble when Yogi became the manager. When he came to the mound, he often spoke in what I'm going to say was a garbled kind of voice. And I really couldn't understand most of the time what he was saying. And I finally asked Tom, I said, look, I can't understand Yogi when he comes to the mound. Can you? What do you do? And he said, look, it's easy. Don't worry about it. So when Yogi comes to the mound, he's going to say a few things. And when he's done, if he doesn't put his hand out, you say, okay, he'll go back to the dugout. If he puts his hand out, you put the ball in it, and you go back to the dugout.
That's great. Well, that's the kind of stuff we like to hear, and it's such a shame, such a young man. And he really made it okay to be a Met fan in New York, and we're all missing him. So grateful. It's just, I was amazed myself looking on social media that how many people said they never thought they'd be this affected by a celebrity or a ball player, an athlete passing away. But I think it's just so much that it's another loss of our youth, and that's what I think gets to a lot of us.
Well, it was a time when there were a lot of wholesome values at play, and Tom was in the middle of not only the Players Association, but what went on in the clubhouse, what went on the field, was very involved in trying to make the life for the players as good as it can be, make the team as good as it can be, along with excelling himself. I think it's rare to see that anymore, but there were, I believe, more of that type individuals around back in the 70s and into the 80s, maybe in all walks of life. I don't know, but that's just how change has occurred over the course of time.
Right. Well, Jon Matlack, I want to thank you for taking a few minutes today and talk about your teammate and friend, Tom Seaver. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. He is gone, and he will certainly be missed.
Yes, certainly will. Thank you so much, Jon. I really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye. Joining me now as we celebrate the life of Tom Seaver is one of his teammates, Skip Lockwood, pitcher for the New York Mets from 1975 to 1979. And Skip, welcome back to MetsMusings.
Oh, Gary, thank you. It's great to be here. You and I talked last year, actually in 18, about a new book that I had coming out, and I thank you for the plug that you gave me online, and it was great talking to you back then. So I'm pleased to call you again. I lost one of my buddies last week. It's Tom Seaver. He was really a good friend and a mentor for me when I got to the Mets. He was, one of the first guys that came over and shared with me some of the things that he did. And he set a great example. Tom was a guy that was always ready to pitch. He did the calisthenics, and he did the running, and he did the mental preparation, and he was an artist with a baseball uniform on, and he really prepared himself when he was going to go out to pitch. And I saw him do that. He kept a book on the hitters, and he was a guy that went out there, very well prepared. And what he expected, which I had never come across before, he expected me, if I was going to pitch in one of his games, he expected me to be just as prepared. Now, I will tell you, I was pretty much a fastball pitcher, and I didn't know the guys in the National League very well. So it was a step up for me to try to learn from him and listen, watch what he did, and listen to how he conducted himself. It was like watching a painting being painted. It was just that kind of guy that was mesmerizing in terms of how he went about his business. Quick story about Tom is when I was I pitched one year with the Mets, and then the next year I was going to be their closer. I pitched the final game for Tom in 75 when he won the Cy Young Award that year. Yeah, I guess I did a pretty good job, and he liked the way I was throwing the ball. I tried to throw hard and throw strikes. And so he said to me, he said, I went in and he said, I got you a 3-year contract. I said, you did what? He said, I got you a nice 3-year contract. He said, you'll be able to settle down here. He says, I want you to move out to Connecticut with Nancy and I, close to us. He said, I'll give you a ride to the ballpark as much as I can. But he said, it's a good place to live. And he said, I got my real estate agent, looking around for a place for you already. So this was like all new information for me. And sure enough, I had a nice 3-year contract waiting for me. I didn't have to negotiate very much. He found me a house, out in Connecticut, in the town where he lived, and he even got me to join a country club where he played golf. And so he was a guy that was really looking out for me. And so I used to ride to the ballpark with him, not every day because sometimes he has things to do, but at least once or twice a homestand. And so I had, an extra hour an hour and a half with him in a car 2 or 3 times a week. And I tell you, you had to be on your A game. I mean, he was not just baseball. He was all about history and philosophy. And he'd ask you questions that it was hard to answer. Mm-hmm. What do you think about when you're in between innings? Well, I don't know what I think about in between innings. And he was saying to me, he says, the last time you pitched, it looked like you were nervous. When you tried to stay, game ready, up in mm-hmm. between innings. And he said, you'll exhaust yourself doing that. He said, I always use a red light, green light. He said, it was a red light when I came off the field because I wasn't going to have to pitch for 5 or 10 minutes. And then when I went across the foul line back out there again, it was green light. He said, I think you ought to try to do something like that so you can relax a little bit, in between innings. And again, this is new information for me. I never thought about stuff like that. But Tom was just that kind of guy. He had planned out, everything about the game in such good detail, great detail. And he expected you to have the kind of preparation. So I was running sprints I never ran before and distance running and doing calisthenics and stuff. And I never got in that good a shape in my life. But it was all because he expected me to, mm-hmm. It was what he wanted from the guys that came out and pitched in his ball games.
Right.
So it was good for me. And then, of course, on June 15th, 77, my ride to the ballpark didn't show up.
Yeah.
And so I was waiting at the curb, waiting for him to come by. And so he didn't come. And I called into the ballpark to find out, whether he forgot me or what happened. And they said that they had traded him. And I said, oh, man. All right. Well, I called my backup ride, which was Dave Kingman. Also lived out there. And he didn't answer either. I called the ballpark up again. And I said, what happened to Kingman? Oh, we traded him too.
Oh, my goodness.
You traded both of them? Those guys gave me my ride. So I had to just start riding to the ballpark myself. I had to buy a car and ride to the ballpark myself. It was a big loss for me when they traded him. And,
yeah.
And certainly I knew that Tom wasn't feeling well the last couple of years with Lyme disease and a little bit of dementia. Mm-hmm. I knew that he wasn't himself, and I know he didn't go to Hall of Fame in a couple of years, and he didn't do a couple of things that he really usually would want to do. So I know he wasn't feeling too good. I think he's got a vineyard, if you know, out in California,
yes.
Calistoga.
Uh-huh.
And his vineyards are right in the path of a couple of fires. A couple of years ago, I was talking to him, and he was out in the fields, and I made the mistake of saying, are you out with your trees? and they're not trees, they're fruit. So he gave me a lesson in fruit while he had me on the phone. It's typical Tom. These are fruits, man. These aren't trees. He's telling me all about fruit. And when I called him a couple of years ago, he was out there walking with one of the dogs. And he says, I can see smoke and fire, all up on the horizon around the rim of the mountains around me. Man, I said, well, number one, you need to get out of there and get someplace safe. And he was saying, no. He said, they'll put that out before it ever gets to me. But he actually had to leave, I guess, a couple of days later.
Wow.
He took the dogs, and Nancy and him packed it up. I don't know where they went to, maybe gone to Nevada, someplace like that. But I was just wondering whether or not, the latest fire out there would have been, something he would have worried about, the week or so. I don't know.
Well, it was a shock to all of us here in New York. I guess for us as fans, at my age, especially, I grew up. I was what was I 14 when he first came up in '67. So to see him pitch the whole career and to see everything afterwards, and now to lose one of your heroes, it really has hit a lot of people here in New York, and I know it's hit your teammates. One thing I was talking to Jon Matlack about just the other day. He was on, and he mentioned that Tom, and you kind of touched on it too, and I believe it's in your book as well. He didn't give you advice. He didn't get into the mechanics of the pitching motion and all of that. But he was more about the mental part of the game. You would concur with that, I guess, right?
Yeah, I never. I was kind of a one-pitch pitcher. I had a pitch and a half. I had a half of a curveball and a little bit of a fastball. So I didn't have a great variety. And I tried to throw it at the middle of the plate, and maybe if it had life to it, it'd find a corner someplace. I didn't pitch much because I was pitching the 8th and 9th innings. Wasn't trying to be real cute, out there. Nobody expected me to be, pitch that way anyway. But Matlack, I think, and Tom would talk, and Kuzman was the same way. I think they would talk about, setting pitches up and pitching the second inning, before you pitch the first, and make sure you're going to get the guy out if you got him out one way. One time you're going to get him out maybe a different way the second time, men on base and all that. He was an artist. I don't think he was that much ahead of his time because there was a lot of guys that were pitching that way, starting to pitch that way when Tom was around. But I think he was a pioneer, and he certainly was a guy that with the Mets that we all looked to. When we got in trouble or if we had some stuff, he'd come right over to you and he'd say, I see you doing this. Well, why are you doing that? You need to get on this track over here. This is what you need to do. And we never talked much about grips and wind up and all of that stuff. But we did talk about the mental part of the game and a lot.
And Skip, when you think about Tom Seaver now, and as you go on, and you will, what makes you smile? What's going to make you smile about when you think of Tom?
Well, I think the end of '75, it was Tom was getting tired. He was in a dead sprint trying to get the Cy Young Award, National League Cy Young. He had pitched very well. I think he had got 20, 21 wins already, and we're going into Cincinnati, I think, and might have been Philadelphia. And he was going to go one more time, and he really wanted to win. When he came to me before the game, and he said, man, he said, I'm sucking wind out there. He said, I've pitched a lot this year, and he said, I just want you to know that I'm going to go 6 and you're going to go 4. I'm going to go 5 and you're going to go 4. I said, well, I am? We are? All right, I didn't, okay. And so he did. He went 5 and he came out. They called down in the 5th inning and said, you're going in for him in the 6th. And true to form, I was in there. And I think I was sitting on a 2-run lead or something like that. But, it's stressful. You get in a game and there's a guy that, can win I think it was his 4th Cy Young. Guy that can win an award like that.
Right.
I'm out there, journeyman pitcher from the other league trying to win a job. It was a privilege and it was a thrill. And I just remember him coming to me before the game and telling me, you're going to pitch today, so get your butt ready. That was a big day for both of us.
Well, Skip, I want to thank you for taking some time out of your schedule and talking to us and helping us get to know Tom better as fans. You guys know him best of all, and thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime. I'd be glad to talk to you. Thanks.
Joining me now is the author who's been on the show a number of times, and he is the co-author of a fantastic book called After the Miracle, The Lasting Brotherhood of the 69 Mets, and he co-authored the book with Art Shamsky. He is Erik Sherman. And Erik, thanks so much for taking time out to come on and say a few words about Tom.
Well, Gary, the pleasure is all mine. Thanks for having me back on.
Erik, do you remember the first time that you met Tom Seaver?
Oh, well, sure. I actually met him as a kid at an autograph signing. I guess it was back in 1980, 81, 82, in that area. Mm-hmm. It was when autograph signings were relatively a new thing, and I remember he was at a signing along with Steve Garvey I think it was at the Hilton on 6th Avenue in Manhattan. And so I met him there, and he was nice enough, but I truly, met him at his home in Calistoga, in the Napa Valley when I went out there with my co-author of After the Miracle, Art Shamsky, along with Jerry Kuzman, Ron Swoboda, and Buddy Harrelson. That was the first time where I was in his home, and I really got to know him over that weekend that we spent in California.
Well, you mentioned the book. I've said this a million times. I'm not saying anything new. To me, it's a fantastic book. It's the New York Mets, Boys of Summer. If anybody's ever read The Boys of Summer, it's as good, if not better, than that book for Met fans as that was for Dodger fans. It was a terrific book, and I guess if people don't know about the book, they would. The whole idea about the book was that it was basically a trip that you and four
Yep.
Met teammates took out to California to see Tom Seaver, and I'll let you explain why they decided to take that trip.
Well, essentially, the book it's really two books in one. So the bookends were the planning of that trip to see Tom with some of the guys from the 69 Mets, and then the end of the book it's the actual trip itself. And then the middle part of the book, we went back and took a look at 1969 with all the living players at that time that we wrote the book. We've since lost Ed Charles. He was our first interview. And really looking at not just the key points of that season, but also what was going on in the world at that time. It was a terrible time in the country's history with Vietnam and race riots and all kinds of problems. And so, but the trip itself, the reason that we did it, when Art and I got together to talk about the angle that we were going to use with this book, there have been something like 35 books written about the 69 Mets. So we wanted a unique angle. And, but, of course, we wanted to interview Tom. And Tom was suffering the effects of Lyme disease, which he contracted something like 20 years ago while he was living in Greenwich, Connecticut. And so he could no longer travel, and he wouldn't be able to make it back for the 50th anniversary of the 69 Mets at Citi Field, which took place last summer. And so we felt that instead of interviewing over the phone, that we would actually bring the celebration of the 50th anniversary to him and bring some of the guys along. And that's what we did. And as it would turn out, that would be the last time that they would all get together. And I think that they knew that. And, at the end of the visit, to see Tom, the guys just, we all had lunch after touring Tom's vineyard. We all just kind of mulled around the parking lot for about an hour. Nobody wanted to leave because I think those guys realized that, that this was it, that this was the last time they were ever going to see each other in person.
And as it turns out, I guess it was. And this year, 2020, hasn't been wacky enough. There are some connections almost to 69 if you think about it. It's 51 years now, but the unrest, the violence in the streets and so whatnot, so the pandemic, it's just such a turbulent time, and then to have this happen, and it's why it was kind of it really shocked me to hear about it, and I guess it's almost, I guess in the back of older Met fans' mind, it's always a thought that he's getting an age, he had this illness, but it still was a shock. And how did you feel when you heard the news?
I received a text from a friend of mine, and before I answered him back, I did a quick Google search on my phone, and didn't see the news right away. My friend had heard it from Susan Waldman during a Yankee broadcast the other night, and it must have just come over the wire. And I kept checking for the next 10 or 20 seconds, and then I did find something that said that Tom had passed away, and I was shocked by the news, but I wasn't surprised. It was one of those things, there was a sense of finality.
Yes.
Where you're like, my God, Tom Seaver is really gone. And, for people of our generation, I mean, this is a big chunk of our youth that's now gone. And, I had known that Tom's condition had really worsened a great deal after that visit that we paid. And he was really in a bad way now for close to a couple of years. And I don't think a lot of people realized how bad it was. And, that there was no possible way that he was going to make it last summer. I mean, that was never in question. So I wasn't surprised, but what did surprise me was that part of the reason he died so quickly, or relatively quickly, was due to COVID. That I was like, oh my goodness, that's, I just hope that he didn't suffer.
Yeah, well, the release said he went peacefully in his sleep. Have you been able to talk to any of his teammates at all?
Well, I talk to Art Shamsky pretty much every day, and we become great friends. Jerry Kuzman and I have reached out with one another. I mean, he was the second person I reached out to after Art the other night. I've been getting calls nonstop, not just from people related to that particular team and organization and time period, but also, believe it or not, some of the 86 Mets, like Doug Fisk, who actually saved the game that Seaver pitched in his return to the Mets in '83. Seaver pitched the first 6 innings against the Phillies, and then Fisk, who grew up a huge 69 Mets fan out of the Seattle area, he saved the game of his hero from when he was a boy. So he called me the other day, and Bruce Bereni, and so it's really reverberated, and I really think this one was personal. Like, this one really hit home. It, for a lot of other people, it would be like when we heard Elvis died, or when Michael Jackson or Prince died. Tom Seaver was just such an iconic figure, not just in New York, but throughout sports globally, really.
Yeah, I think we all pictured him as that 25-year-old bulldog on the mound with the thick legs and the strong arm, and the ex-Marine, and he just seemed indestructible, and it just seemed for him to get sick like that. It almost seemed, it was something not right about the whole thing. I don't know how else to put it. I'm struggling here today, but
well, I think I can help you out with that. I've been posting photos of my trip out with the guys to see Tom, and on Facebook. I have a Facebook account. I have an Erik Sherman baseball Facebook account, and I have Twitter, which is @by Erik Sherman. I'm not plugging myself. I'm just using it to exemplify that I've really studied those photos of the trip from 3 years ago. And if you look at those photos, I mean, you're looking at a guy, Tom Seaver, that looks phenomenal. I mean, he was 72. He might have been carrying an extra 10 pounds from his playing days. That's about it. You compare that to most of these guys that retire, and, the pitchers especially, for some reason, they put on all kinds of weight. But Seaver was in good shape, and, he worked in his vineyard every single day, and he probably walked 10 miles a day as a result. And, he looked great. But when I was there, he tended to repeat himself, which is common. It's a common side effect of Lyme disease. So then, not long after our trip there, he developed dementia. And then, that really robbed him of much of his memory of people, which is common. It is hard to believe, because when you look at him, even the picture that Ann Seaver, his daughter, posted yesterday, it was the last photo, I think, that she took of Tom out in his vineyard. I mean, he still really looked good. And, 75 years old. I mean, he had all of his hair, and, he looked good. He had color in his face, and, so it's very hard to believe that someone as strong as Tom, succumbed to this. But getting old's tough,
Oh, yeah, I know. I'm not that far behind him. I'm about 8 years, but I know, and I think that's why it sometimes something like this hits us as well, because it goes into our own mortality, and it gets a little frightening when you start to think about it. I'm looking at some of the pictures. They are terrific pictures. There's a couple of terrific ones. One of you in a restaurant, I guess it is, with Tom. And you, I guess it's by his house with you and Jerry Kuzman and Tom. And there's a great picture of Tom talking to Ron Swoboda, and he's explaining something with his hands. Was he talking about the wine, or was he talking about a situation, or?
He was absolutely talking about the wine process. There were two things that Tom loved to talk about. The first was his vineyard. The pride that he took in his vineyard was off the charts. And then the second thing he loved talking about was Gil Hodges. He would just go on and on and on about Gil and the influence that his manager had on his life. A father figure to him, not just a manager, but a father figure, and just like this shining example of what a man's supposed to be. It was just remarkable. And of course, the Hall of Fame conversation came up, and he's like, the guy was right in the middle of that Dodgers lineup, and all those pennant-winning years, and had 370 home runs, and was the manager of the Miracle Mets, and then he said, but the thing that really puts him over the top in his eyes was, the fact that he befriended Jackie Robinson and really helped Jackie feel comfortable up in the major leagues. And so, and of course that all goes towards what kind of man Gil was, especially during that period, 1947. So those were the two things that I think Tom liked to talk about the most, his vineyard and Gil.
And you have a couple of great stories in the book. One about driving to visit Tom, and it's one of the more interesting stories in the book with a car you thought might not make it. Wonder if you relate that.
Oh my goodness! Gary, they're honestly, so we went to see Tom in May of 2017, and I am not exaggerating. There could have been 50 things that could have derailed this meeting with Tom. First, real quick, like a few. You had Ron Swoboda's wife who was recovering from cancer, and he was broadcasting games in New Orleans. So we had to work around his schedule, and he needed to find someone to care for his wife during that weekend. Jerry Kuzman, suffered a heart attack about 20-something years ago. So he had to be careful and make sure that he was up for the trip. Buddy Harrelson was just starting, just in the beginnings of his own Alzheimer's and his memory loss. And then there was Tom, and, his wife, Nancy, told Art on the phone, you guys could come all the way out here, and if he's having a bad day, he won't be able to see you. So there was that, and then, we're in the car, and, we're driving to Tom's that morning. Everything's a go. It's a green light to go and see him, and the emergency light goes on in the van that we rented, and I'm like, oh my God, after all this. And there was just like a laundry list of other things that could have derailed the trip. And I'm thinking, we had this absolutely top 10 weather day of the year. Tom's feeling good. Everyone in the car is feeling good. And we're on our way. And the rental car, the light goes on, but then it went off. But I was sweating it out. I'm like, oh my God. We were about 25 miles from Tom's house. We were staying in Santa Rosa. So it was like a 30-minute drive, but I was really worried the car was going to break down. It was very stressful, but once we got there, I felt much better.
Any moments that you had on that trip, like alone moments with Tom that you'd care to talk about at all?
Yeah, it was interesting. Everybody knew why I was there. I was there to help Art write a book about the reunion, at Tom's. And so Tom was gracious enough to give us a tour of his vineyard. Had to have been 3 hours. And we're walking down the hill of the vineyard, and for whatever reason, I found myself alone with Tom, and Art was with us too. The other three had walked ahead. I think, maybe a couple of them needed to use the bathroom or something like that.
That's what happens with a 70-year-old man.
Yeah, but we had Tom to ourselves for, I would say, a good 30 or 40 minutes. And we just stopped and we talked at the base of the vineyard. And that's when he, talked to us about Gil and was telling us about, Gil's value of his marriage to Joan Hodges and how that influenced Tom with his own marriage to Nancy, and just going on, and we talked about all kinds of things, and it was just tremendous. I mean, the weekend, we couldn't have written the script any better than it was. It was just perfect.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, and I know this was last minute, and I know you're getting a lot of requests, and I appreciate you taking the time out. And not only did Tom Seaver, he made it okay to be a Met fan almost. He brought something. He led the charge to the '69 team when he came up in '67, and made it okay to be a Met fan. And we're really going to miss him. We are
indeed, and the pleasure is all mine, Gary, for having me on today.
Okay, and I'll be right back right after this. Tom Seaver was the greatest Mets player of all time. Could be one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. And he will surely be missed. He made it okay to be a Mets fan when he came along in '67 and took a struggling franchise and made it his own. And for that, we will always miss Tom and always remember him. So let's get that statue up there. And let's all visit Tom Seaver Way and have a smile and shed a tear over the life times of a great baseball player. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll tune in again on another edition of Met.